At an informal meeting yesterday, a lady who is working for the World Union Center in Calcutta, she asked, what is our attitude to the present movement for the liberation of women? This question has been asked quite frequently, especially since this is the International Women's Year and a world convention, I believe, is going to meet somewhere this month. And though the Prime Minister and the Chief Minister of Orissa, who are to represent India, they have had to drop out due to political developments. A strong delegation from India has indeed gone there. But the question is, what is the attitude of Mother and Sri Aurobindo on this question? Before coming to Mother's attitude, which is essentially based upon spiritual principles, let us be clear that the problem of women in the East is quite different from the problem of women in the West. In the West, generally speaking, women are dependent economically upon men only if they choose to be so. If they want to launch upon a career of their own and maintain themselves independently, there is nothing to prevent them from doing so. But it is not so in India, especially it's not so in the East, especially India. We won't speak for the moment of China, but say countries like Indonesia, Thailand, Indochina, Burma, Japan, all these places, there is a heavy tradition in the East which somehow in practice has condemned women to second-class citizenship. However able they may be, however educated they may be, choosing their own careers was being frowned upon till, say, about 20 or 30 years ago. It was unthinkable for even brilliant women to seek employment or to practice as lawyers or engineers in that. It was understood that whatever their academic attainments, their final aim was to be married and become part of an household. In my own family, we have women who have been brilliant, won gold medals, stood first, and all that. But after they completed their university education, the parents arranged their marriages and they docilely accepted the choice, and they are today mothers of children looking after the house. Obviously they have forgotten all that they had learned. Now this is the story that is repeated everywhere with a few exceptions of modern times. So even in the East, especially in India, if a woman wants to be economically independent, she can't be. the whole family system, the joint family system, the social conventions, they look upon it as something of an aberration. Today, however, the economic conditions and the economic stress is forcing people to break these conventions. Because during the last 10 years, the tendency for inflation has been continuous. The population has been rising at an alarming rate, with the result that only one breadwinner in a family, say the husband, is not enough to meet the situation. Therefore, people are winking at the wives taking jobs, maybe teachers, maybe clerks, maybe typists, that sort of thing, and supplement the income of the husband. During the last 4 or 5 years in India, this has become an accepted mode, especially in the middle classes. And the taboo against women seeking careers is slowly wearing out. But still, we have a long way to go. In the West, I believe, generally speaking, this is not the case. Women are accepted in public fields, careers, and though I do not know conditions at first hand, from what I read, from what I hear, they have become indispensable parts of the social public life in certain sectors. So, the problems of women in the West are a bit different from those in the East. For women in the East, it is the economic security, the economic conditions that have to be tackled first. Today, if a woman in a family shows a certain trait of independence and refuses to accept docilely the rule of the husband or say the father, she can be sent away, she can be punished, and economically she is so insecure that women in India hardly think of these possibilities. They are always aware that they are dependent upon men for their living. If they have children, it is worse. Now this state of affairs has to be first remedied before the wise people who are meeting at the convention can think of liberating women. People who have been to countries like Russia, China, communist countries, speak admiringly of the equality of status that has been given to women, but still certain literature that is being handed out by intellectuals who have defected, they do not seem to confirm this story. Even if you assure a social equality, the women themselves have to feel their independence. Do they psychologically feel free from dependence upon men? It is there that the mother has a few hints which could serve as guidelines. She first says that as long as men and women continue to live in the present human ignorant consciousness, dominated by vital impulses, desires, no real liberation is possible. just as purely political and economic amelioration of conditions of people in general are not enough to make them happy, to make them truly useful members of society. Similarly, to assure by law or by economic patterning of the society some kind of equality, paper equality between men and women, it is not going to help the women in the long run. On this subject, Mother wrote a small piece some years ago, calling it The Problem of Women. Some of you may have read it, but all of you may not have followed the implications of her writing. She says, no law can liberate women unless they liberate themselves. I am sure when she wrote this sentence, she had no idea of the present forms or manifestations of the women's lib movement in America, the hysterics and the wild movements like tearing off their clothes, setting fire to things and all the sort of thing which we hear reported in prominent American journals like The Time or the Newsweek. However, what makes them slave is attraction towards the male and his strength. Now this Sri Aurobindo also has commented somewhere that this is an impulse that has been planted in woman by nature for her own purpose. A woman, he particularly Sri Aurobindo mentions how a woman tends to admire, for instance, he says military uniform. Not that men don't admire it, but still the idea of strength, domination, safety that the person he can assure. Now this is very much tied up with the notion of weaker sex, sedulously propagated by man down the ages. Attraction towards the male and his strength. This should go. Women themselves must build up their own strength, build up a courage and strength which can surely be at par with man's. One of the reasons why Mother started this program of physical education for women was that in 1947, when there was an almost physical attack on the existence of the ashram, led by the communists. At that time the Indian Union government was not here. We were under French rule. And 1947, August 15, India became independent. And the French authorities here were afraid and nervous that the population, indigenous population in French India also would become restive. So they did their best to support the hooligans and all parties who were opposed to French India seeking a merger with the Indian Union. Now Sri Aurobindo, being an Indian revolutionary in his past, and the ashram containing number of people who freedom fighters and who were bold thinkers, who did not accept the inevitability of French rule here. The ashram was looked upon as a possible strength, a source or center of pro-Indian, pro-independence movement. So all the wrong elements in Pondicherry, and the Communist Party was as usual quick to seize the situation. So they joined, and there was an attack, And on the 15th of August 1947, one of the personal attendants upon Sri Aurobindo was stabbed right outside the ashram gate. Now Sri Aurobindo took serious notice of the fact that instead of anybody else, the hostile forces chose a personal attendant, one who was attending upon him personally. So it was a sort of a direct challenge. The local parties, the local government were tools, but that apart. And then, we were not so many in number at that time, we must have been 300 or 400 people perhaps, or 400 or 500. Yes, 600 if I remember right. And it was a problem at that time that after meditation in the evenings, mother used to come above Diman's room, near the boiler, and after 7 to 7:30, it was a problem to reach women to their houses. So at that time women were not bold like as they are today in the ashram, and all women were, mother was even frowning if women kept their head open. She was always saying you must put mostly the dress was saris, and she had to put the cover, and each one had to be provided with an escort. So escort groups were formed according to localities. The women would be reached to their respective places. Otherwise these Gunda elements were there. So it was at that time mother thought of a program that women should cultivate a spirit of self-reliance, self-defense. So she started with the younger children because she knew the conservative resistance that was to be expected from the older sadhikas, and naturally they found that all these physical culture programs and things like that could not be done with saris on. So I believe the mother started with long trousers reaching up to the feet, and a few were started, and after it became normal, everybody was accustomed, and nobody would look at our women twice because they wore trousers. Slowly they were made shorter and shorter. You see. And to the first woman who was to wear the shorts, so that she may not say anything, mother herself took the dress and gave it in full public view to that lady, so that they could not say no. And thereafter it started, and for a long time, when any person joined the groups, mother herself used to give the dress. Sometime later it dropped out. Now all that I am saying is that her idea in starting this was that women should become self-reliant, self-sufficient, particularly in physical strength. That old notion that women are weak, that had to be exploded. And I have to admit that she succeeded in it to an eminent degree. So much so that I believe about 10 years ago, when one of our ashram girls was walking in the street, it was a bit dark, one local boy, young man, quite well built, he came and tried to, touch her and that sort of thing. He thought this is one of the Indian women. I believe he was a Creole. Creole means half French and half Indian, mixed, half caste. Then that girl, she turned round, she was a boxer. You see, and she pummeled him so hard that those people who were watching from it, they ran away. You understand? And that thereafter, the thing of outside local boys coming and harassing our girls, it stopped. She gave me such a sound beating that all were in admiration, full of admiration. That man was unfortunate in that he chose a boxer. Now this sort of thing, that women building up their strength, physical strength, Well, you can read, we can understand, mentally we know we are strong, women are equal of men and all that. Yes, everybody can be convinced. But the basis, unless you have the physical foundation in the material world, you must have a material base. So for that, they must build up their physical strength and cease to rely upon men for manual jobs. Mother poo-poohed the idea that physiologically women shall not do certain jobs. Women shall not do certain jobs or in certain periods, and that men should be. She said no. This is again one of the old wrong notions of the past, like the idea of death, like the idea of inevitable disintegration. So that has to go. And she has been proved right, at least in Russia. There are engine drivers, there are porters in some countries, they lift heavy loads. Where are the men? The men are not called because for the simple reason that men are not enough. Manpower is less. For instance, in Germany, women are doing so many jobs which in our country would think twice. So this is nothing but a social habit. So that is what Mother meant, that women have to get over the dependence upon the male and his strength. This is not a theory, but it is a practice. Second, desire for home life and its security. This is another one of those, seeking for creature comfort, security. This is a tendency, human tendency of inertia, relaxation, not wanting to adventure beyond a certain safe limit. This also has to be broken. Third, attachment to motherhood. And this is true. However bravely women may talk in their earlier years, the desire for motherhood does get away at some stage or other. I don't say it is entirely psychological or vital. There are certain cells in the body, certain parts in the constitution which have been specifically designed for the nourishment, for the bringing up of children. So till they are transformed, till they are given an alternate occupation, this desire for motherhood is bound to come. How are we to provide alternate interests? That is where the spiritual element comes in. Why should you not look upon other children also as your own? To accept the truth that the whole world is your family, not the one in the four walls of your house. Once we accept the truth that all children are entitled to my love, to the pouring of my energies, things make a vast difference. And that is where the spiritual element comes in. And Mother says that unless you rise in yourself to the spiritual level of consciousness, this problem cannot be solved. Otherwise man will be man, dominating man, and woman will be submitting woman. It is only when you rise into the spiritual consciousness that you feel that this is a difference, the most physical type. Otherwise we are souls, we are projections and emanations of the divine, children of nature. And the elements that are common are much more than the few physical elements that emphasize the distinction. Having said this, she says, if they get free from these three slaveries, attraction towards the male and his strength, desire for home life and security, attachment to motherhood, they will truly be the equal of men. Then follows a typical note typical of mother. That is, she says, men also have 3 slaveries. Nobody thinks men have slaveries. That is, spirit of possession, attachment to power and domination. Certainly, this spirit and attachment and feeling for domination is not an exclusive property of men. It is a vital impulse. It is there in all orders of creation. But human society being organized in favor of men so far, it is men who articulate this spirit more than women. But where women have been given a chance, I have not found them lacking in these features. That shows again that it can be got over only as you develop in spiritual sensitivity. When spiritually you realize that these are inferior modes of life, that they tend to involve us more and more in movements of lower nature and do not help at all in getting detached and recovering our poise in the soul or the self. It is only then that the spirit of possession, the desire to possess, the desire to exercise power, dominate over others, they weaken. One feels the meaninglessness of it all. If I dominate over one person, 10 other persons dominate over me. It is a human, not exclusively a male weakness. It is a human feature. Wherever there is this vital, the rajas element, these things are bound to be there. However, as things stand, they are characteristic of men. Desire for sexual relation with women. It operates both ways, though at any rate in the East, the partial standard of morality that is has been helpful to men. That is, men may commit any number of sins, what are called sins, deviations from the accepted modes of behavior, but women cannot. Even in the Middle East, as you know, we have never heard of men being stoned, isn't it? Even Jesus Christ had to throw a symbolic stone against a woman only. Now this is a one-way standard, one-way traffic you may say. It's a partial standard which has obtained in the East for centuries. Even in Europe, till recently, it used to be so. It is only now that the laws of divorce and things have been relaxed and women have been given the freedom to seek separation if their husbands are. But it is not so easy in the East. This standard has to break down. And inevitably what happens when this moral law favorable to men is changed, there is bound to be an interim period when all the pent-up emotions and forces come into the open, and you see a period of sexual anarchy, whether in the West or in the East. But this is only a transitional phase. The sexual equality between men and women is bound to follow thereafter. I do not speak of a future which mother confidently envisages, when sex as a force will cease to dominate the life of humanity. She envisages that as the new consciousness, the consciousness of the supramental, percolates the earth atmosphere, organizes itself, and new Gnostic communities take shape and build up their own lives, sex will cease to play its present part. For the simple reason, he says, that in the new body that the supramental beings will have, there will be no sex organs. So there will be necessarily no sex life. Then she was asked, how is reproduction going to take place? How are children going to be born? She said, nature has not yet revealed that secret. How, without the sex mechanism, children are going to be born, we do not know yet. But it is a problem of the far future. So many gradations of humanity have to be organized. It is not that sex is going to fall off immediately. There will be stages when sex will have a diminishing pull, a diminishing hold on sections of humanity. And it is only at the peak that it will cease to have any attraction. So there again, it is the evolution of the human consciousness into the spiritual belt that will bring the solution. The liberation of men and women from sexual attraction for each other. Third, attachment to the small comforts of married life. So these are things of the lower vital or the physical mind, wanting to stay confined, wanting to stay put in certain existing situations to which one is accustomed. It is only as the soul grows and casts off these self-improvised and self-erected barriers that this attachment to the little comforts, creature comforts of life, that they will recede. And then comes the climax. If the men get rid of these three slaveries, they can truly become the equal of women. Now only mother could have said it. These are the principles, I believe, which are of universal application, and whether our Indian delegates, or at least the delegates from Aurobindo, will emphasize, bring up these angles of approach and present them in an effective manner, we do not know. But let me assure you, there is no other solution to the problem. Woman must be made self-sufficient and self-existent and self-defensive, self-reliant in the existing setup of consciousness. Second, she must be educated to develop a consciousness which goes beyond the division of man and woman. Just as we aim at developing a consciousness which shall break the division between me and you, between one individual and another, the division that has been erected by ego. Similarly, this division that has been erected by lower nature, division owing to sex, that has to be transcended, and that can be done only by developing an inner consciousness. So, this women's liberation movement, international year, will have served its purpose if it emphasizes that this movement for the liberation of women is truly a part of the cosmic movement for the transcendence of the present human consciousness, dominated by ego and the vital desires. That the human consciousness has to cross over into a spiritual belt and thence into the belt of the truth consciousness, that is a further matter. So this is not a chance, not an accident, that this movement has come at a time when the whole of humanity in its higher mind has accepted the necessity of transcending the present human mode. This is a part of it, because half of humanity is affected by it.
One question.
Yes?
Genders on the physical plane, they exist in the physical, they remain in
No, in the subtle physical, I am told the difference is not operated. The organs may be there, but there is no functional difference. Man doesn't behave like a man, and woman doesn't behave like a woman when they meet. They behave like beings. Beings.
And what about the spiritual significance in Shakti and the Purusha? There is not a question of gender?
No. It is a question of difference of stress. There is a certain, that the one being, one consciousness, and for purposes of manifestation, a part has a different stress, another part has another stress. That part which concentrates on peace, calm, self-gathering, holding in reservoir, that is the Purusha, called the Purusha. Also called in some traditions the static. That part which is ebullient, which is full of power, which is going to execute, which is held in the intention and the vision of the static one, that is called the dynamic, or that is called the Shakti. But remember that the static, the Shakti is the Purusha himself as Shakti. As the Purusha, Supreme Purusha, is here in status of quiet and peace, self-gathered contemplation, he is there in a form of movement, active movement, dynamic effectuation, that is Shakti. There is no question of gender, there is a question of function, not gender. The question of gender arrives only at the physical earth stage, where nature has given that formation for its own purpose.
It would not mostly apply to the female and the
No, it is not. It is not. For instance, I'll tell you. You have heard of Ramakrishna. His Shakti was Vivekananda. He was certainly not a female, very much male. And moreover, spiritually speaking, each one of us, whether a man or a woman, we have a Purusha aspect and a Shakti aspect. I have my own Shakti within myself. You have a Purusha Shakti within yourself. Put in other words, that part of me which is not involved, but which sees, which guides, which supervises what I am doing, that is the Purusha aspect. That part of me which executes through my mind, through my vital energy, through my physical limbs and all that, that is my Shakti. I do not need to manifest the divine. I do not need to have a physical, a human Shakti. Both the Shakti and Shakta are within oneself. If the modern science, scientific findings, that in every man there are certain things which are maybe called the female elements, and the female also has certain male elements. Well, it is a physical expression of this truth that in each embodied being there are both the static and the dynamic aspects. There are both the Purusha and the Shakti. It happens when such work of worldwide importance is to be done. The divine takes birth, the divine manifests as Purusha and Shakti in exceptional way. But this is not the pattern for every situation or every stage in evolution. It is not that Krishna functioned through his Shaktis. It is not that Rama functioned through his Shakti. For instance, if you consider Sita as his Shakti, Krishna had supposed to have 8 wives. Certainly not. He functioned on his own. And the importance of the work before Sri Aurobindo was such that it was necessary for him to live in complete retirement physically for the expedition of the work, for the bringing down of the supramental truths. And Mother came forward and he got an indication that she was to be his Shakti. And yet plainly said that if she were not there, there would be no ashram here. I would not have cared to build up an ashram and to take all disciples and look after them. It is she who did it. But these are occult truths which don't have a standard application everywhere.
The source has all the aspects in itself, but then may be called Sadhana.
No, I think the differentiation in terms of what you speak of comes nearer the physical level, earth level.